Hey guys, and welcome back to Z3 Cubing. Today I'm going to take the very worst 3x3 in my collection and transform it into an actual speed cube. Alright, so let's have a look at what I would consider my worst 3x3. Now this is actually a puzzle that you might recognize from a really old video that has somehow become the most popular one on my channel, which is called My Top 5 Worst Rubik's Cubes, and basically I use this as the example of my worst 3x3 possible. So it's a really cheap cube itself, it turns really terribly, and all of the stickers have fallen off. As you can see, these are the few ones that I've actually stayed on. So my goal today is to take this cube, which is undoubtedly the very worst one in my collection. I think the sticker stands for #1 worst cube, and try and make it turn as good as possible. As you can see, I am very optimistic with my title. I want to be able to speed cube with this cube. I average around 15 seconds, so I think if I can solve it in under 20, I will be happy. Now you may be thinking like, yeah, sure, all the stickers are falling off, but surely it can't be that bad. But no, this thing really is worse than it looks. I'd call it a dollar store cube, but I think that would be vastly overstating its quality. This thing was probably produced for 5 cents, and if you paid $1 for it, you would be getting ripped off. I mean, let's have a look at the mechanism. So as you can see, this is the thinnest plastic imaginable. That is the minimum plastic you can get to have a functional 3x3. Same thing with the corners. That's not even symmetrical. Look at how ridiculous that is. The entire core is made of plastic, and you basically have these little clips that go into the centerpieces to make them spin rather than screws and springs. So needless to say, this cube is absolutely terrible. Again, even the stickers are telling you #1 worst 3x3 in my collection. So today, I'm going to do any and everything I can do to fix it. So normally the first step to a mod like this would be to use a knife and take off all the stickers. But it seems like the cube has kind of taken care of that for us this time, so looks like it will take us about 5 seconds to get those two off, and now the cube is unstickered. That was fast. Now I do intend to put some nicer stickers back on the cube later. In fact, I have some very fast looking stickers to go along with it, but for now I'm just going to leave it unstickered for the rest of the mods. Next step is to take apart the cube, and we're actually going to deal with this core. So I alluded to the core being really terrible and awful earlier, but let's just take a look at that ourselves. So here we have the core, and of course, just because of the way that a 3x3 works, this is always going to end up being the most complicated part of the mechanism because you have to have these 6 individual pieces that can all spin freely to hold everything else together. And I think if we just push on one of these centerpieces, we can get a center cap off. And there we go. There is the clip itself. That is all that is holding these centerpieces on. And honestly, we do not need that. We can just pull it off. We are straight up going to be replacing the core because this one is just so terrible. Oh, that's interesting. There's a screw here. I actually did not know there are screws. Okay, so it seems like we have these kind of clippy things on these 4 sides, and then we have screws on the other 2 sides. There's nothing even to screw into. It's just the screw head itself is holding the piece barely on there by like 1/2 millimeter. There we go. These 2 tiny screws are probably the most expensive part of this entire cube. So basically we're just going to get rid of this core itself, get rid of these screws. We do not need those anymore. So we're just going to make up our own mechanism to work with these centerpieces. Now a common trend among all cubes that cost more than $1 or aren't made by Rubiks is that they have a bit of springiness to them. That's because of course they have a spring in each centerpiece, which kind of allows some elasticity. It allows a bit of flex as you're turning the sides, which allows them to turn way better than this cube. So I think the lack of springs is actually the biggest reason that this cube turns so bad, other than just the horrible plastic quality itself. I mean, you can tell because there's these little black specks. So on a normal cube, you'd put the screw and the spring together, you'd grab a centerpiece, stick it on through, and then you'd screw it into the core like this. Easy as that, right? Well, no, because the hole on the centerpiece is actually way too big. So as you can see, if we would screw this in here, the spring isn't actually doing anything because it's just kind of hanging out in space there. So instead, I devised a plan and I made a little bit of an adapter. This is a little 3D printed part that basically has a hole just big enough for a screw and a spring, and it has a bigger part that sticks right through the hole in the centerpiece. So as you can see, it takes the giant opening that the original mechanism used and converts it into something more like a normal 3x3 that a normal screw and spring can fit into. So now what we can do is take the screw and the spring and just sit it in there just like you would on a normal cube. And now we can screw it into the core just like normal, and it will look just kind of like a normal 3x3 centerpiece. So we'll go ahead and go around the cube and repeat that with all the rest of the centerpieces. Alright, just finishing that up there with the last few centers, and here is the result. So as you can see, it looks a little bit funny because everything is kind of falling into the center here, but once we have everything all pulled apart by the pieces, it should work just fine. So let's go ahead and assemble the puzzle here real quick, and then we can go ahead and take a look and do some first turns on our newly springified 3x3. Alright, now of course this was only the first of many mods that we're going to be doing on this cube to make it better, but let's go ahead and see how good it turns right now. And I thought this might be a little bit too tight, but I think it is good because we're going to have problems with popping no matter what, just because of the nature of how thin these pieces are. But yeah, this is a huge improvement. The springiness of it really does make a huge difference. It actually does give it a surprising amount of forwards corner cutting. As you can see, it just cuts that corner super easily. The big problem now is actually backwards corner cutting, because as you can see, if we try and cut even the tiniest little bit backwards, everything just catches on each other and it becomes a huge locky mess. The cube is barely misaligned, but it's causing this giant lockup. Now, of course, the solution to this on a modern cube is just to round off all the pieces. As you can see, there's so many little curves inside of the pieces of a cube like this, which allows for amazing backwards corner cutting that is just non-existent on this cube. So, of course, our next step on this cube is going to be to round off all the corners as much as we possibly can, and we're going to do that with some sandpaper. So basically, we're going to take a look at all of these little sharp edges on all these pieces and just get a piece of sandpaper like this and sand them down as much as possible. Now, the limiting factor will be just the thickness of the plastic. As you can see, if I cut off any more, the plastic is just going to give in on itself because it's just so thin. But yeah, I'm going to sand it down as much as I possibly can, smooth it out with a bit of a lighter sandpaper like this, and go ahead and get everything as smooth down as possible. Now, I'm not going to be filming it because it makes such a mess that I don't want to do it here on my table, but I'm going to go ahead and take this cube apart, sand down all the edges, and get back to you once everything's smooth. Alright, it is many hours later now, and our cube now looks like this. We went from a super squared off blocky design to something that looks a little bit more like a modern Speedcube, and as you can see, it turns quite a bit better too. We still do have to be pretty careful about popping. I actually have the cube still pretty tight, but other than that, this thing now turns pretty well. As you can see, we still have a decent bit of forwards corner cutting like we had before, but now it also backwards corner cuts just a little bit, not a whole lot, but as you can see, if we do a turn like that, it still will turn, whereas before it just totally locked up. So this is, of course, the same cube, as you can see, all those cheapo little pieces. And by the way, that's why it pops so much. Just because these little tiny arms that are holding the pieces into the puzzle are just so small, there's nothing we can do to get around that. It's just something we have to deal with. But yeah, as you can see, on all the corner pieces, there's these three sides right here that I rounded all down. I basically got some rough sandpaper and got the rough shape of it right. And then I got some finer sandpaper and just smoothed everything out inside of there. And I did the same thing on the edges, of course. There are 4 sides on each of these edges that need to be smoothed out, as well as, of course, 4 sides on each of the center pieces. So I did that on all the pieces. It took forever. And then I also put some Vaseline inside of the puzzle to kind of smooth everything out again. Basically, putting Vaseline in the puzzle and then just turning it a whole bunch acts as kind of like a third, even finer layer of sandpaper around everything, just to make everything even more smooth. And so now it pretty much feels like a finished puzzle on the inside. So after washing out all the Vaseline, because of course we don't want it in the final puzzle, which took forever by the way, it's now time to add some real lubricants to this 3x3. So I have a number of different types of lubricants that I want to try out. Basically I'm going for kind of fast lubricants because right now it feels just kind of slow. I need to be able to flick it and just be able to do a nice turn. That just takes way too much force right now. So I have Lubical Silk right now, which is kind of my favorite. This will make it a little bit faster and kind of smooth things out. DNM 37 if we need things to get faster, as well as Max Fleet. These are just 2 really fast piece lubes that I'm going to try later. I'm going to start out with Lubical Silk though, but before we even get to that, there still is one thing that needs to be lubed, which is the core. So I need to lube basically all the screws and springs and everything, and because that takes a little bit longer and you guys don't want to watch it in real time, I'm just going to take apart this cube right now, lubricate all the core, and then I'll get back to you. I'm using Max Command, by the way, which is a pretty decent core lube. Alright, I just finished lubing the core. Let's see if that impacts the performance, because sometimes it can a little bit, and yeah, that might be a little bit better just because there's not so much friction inside those center pieces, but not a big difference. Let's get on to the real lubes and put these center caps back on. So like I said, let's first try out some Lubical Silk. So let's just open this bottle up here. Let's reach into the cube like this and drop maybe 1 or 2 drops in right there, and maybe do the same thing on the other side of the cube. Just 1, maybe 1.5 drops. Doesn't come out super quickly, but there we go. Now let's go ahead and try out the cube. Now one other unexpected issue I'm coming across as I try and push the performance of this cube to its maximum is just the hollowness of the pieces. So if we take a look at every edge and every corner, it kind of has a hollow section on one of the sides like this, where it's just kind of nothingness. And so as the pieces kind of slide against each other, they can kind of get stuck in each other like this. And so now that I'm just turning the cube around like this, now that we've solved most of the issues, that's kind of what I'm feeling. I'm feeling a little bit of lockups just on the inside of those hollow parts kind of catching on each other. And just like the popping, which I'm also being very careful to prevent, because if I just do this, it will definitely pop. that's something that we just cannot prevent, and we just have to live with it. Alright, now what I think we need is a bit more speed, because even though this cube is super smooth as we're just turning it like this, it still isn't super fast. Like if we just do a flick, it still takes quite a lot of force. So I'm trying to choose between DNM 37, which is kind of more watery, and Max Fleet, which is kind of this cool non-Newtonian lube. I think I'm actually going to go with this one because it's kind of new and interesting and cool. And we'll put some in there, and then we'll go around to the other side of the cube and put a little bit in that side too. Get all that off. It's kind of hard to get off the end of the syringe, but there we go. Now we can kind of break it in, and yeah, that is definitely fast. Now I'd like to say it feels awesome, and don't get me wrong, it definitely does feel amazing compared to how it felt like in the beginning, but the turning of it is still definitely pretty awkward. Everything is just a little bit catchy because of that hollowness of the pieces I was talking about, and it definitely does pop if you do too much force on it. But either way, I think we've done a really good job on this, so I think the only thing left is to get some stickers on this cube so that we can actually do a speed solve and try out the performance for real. Alright, let's check this thing out. You know, putting gain stickers on this just makes it look fast. Now we have to keep in mind that this is still the cheaper than dollar store cube that we started with. As you can see, still the absolute minimum mechanism down inside of there. But as you can see, it still turns decently. I mean, I can do an algorithm on it in faster than I could before, that's for sure. It's really not the speed of this cube or the corner cutting or anything that's slowing me down. It's really just how fragile this thing is. If you were to hold it in your hands, you would just be able to feel that this thing is hardly holding together. And again, that's just a limitation of the mechanism. This is the best that we could do. But yeah, if you just kind of pull on a piece at all, it'll just come out. Now it's time for the ultimate test on this cube, and that is to do a real 3x3 speed solve. So I'm just going to start and stop this timer app on my phone to generate a brand new random scramble. I'm going to do that scramble on this cube and then try and solve it as fast as possible. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I think if I can solve this cube in less than 20 seconds, then I am happy enough to call it an official speed cube. So let's get this scrambled up here, start some inspection, and go ahead and try it. All right, I think I know what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1, and go. Oh, PLL skip, 20.31. That's so close. Okay, I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I have been trying this for over an hour. This is by far my best time yet, and I am not going any later. It's like 10 p.m. right now. I've been going at this for so long, my hands are shaking and sweating at that solve. But yeah, I'm gonna call this a speed cube because I got a 20-second solve on it. I don't care about what past me said. 20 seconds is good enough. Anyway, yeah, obviously this cube is extremely limited just because of the cheapness of the mechanism. Like, this is just the bare minimum amount of plastic that you can possibly get for a cube to work. But I think we did very well considering what we had to work with. And actually, I have done a similar project in the past with a Rubik's brand cube, which is a similarly bad cube, but it has much more substantial pieces on the inside. So it still does pop a little bit, but it actually does turn a lot better. As you can see, I can actually do real algorithms and turn confidently with it. I think the biggest differences between these two is that there's more high quality plastic on the inside of this one, even if the mechanism is equally bad. Plus, these corner pieces don't have little hollowed out sections, which makes it a whole lot more stable. So if you want to watch the video that I made on this one, oh yeah, by the way, it has magnets, which is pretty cool. Then go ahead and click in the little box up above. I pretty much did all the exact same modifications on this cube as I did on this very terrible one. The biggest difference being that this cube just started out a whole lot worse to begin with. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I definitely enjoyed making it, except for that hour of trying to solve it in less than 20 seconds. That wasn't so much fun. But I'm really happy with this result. I'm really surprised that I was able to take my worst cube and turn it into, well, still honestly one of my worst cubes, but at least I can sort of speed solve with it. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this video, and I'll see you guys next time.